I would get really stressed and anxious easily. And I think part of that was growing up in a home where I routinely was not safe. There was always a threat somewhere. So I think I was sort of stuck in fight or flight. I really struggled with suicidal ideation and self harm for a lot of my life. My dad didn't believe any of it. He was like, what a bunch of crap. And that was kind of my attitude as well when I was diagnosed. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Like, I don't have
Yes.
schizophrenia. And I would think people with schizophrenia are crazy. I'm not crazy. I was on a plane that was gonna crash and it was really scary, but it was also strangely peaceful, but also confusing because you'd think that if someone was actively suicidal, then dying on a plane is kind of best case scenario. And instead of feeling yay, I was like, dang, I guess I didn't want to die right now.
Hello and welcome to Ego is Here. Today I'm joined by Johnny Crowder, a musician, mental health advocate, TEDx speaker, and founder of Cope Notes. Through his own journey of trauma, mental illness, and recovery, Johnny has helped countless people rethink their relationship with themselves. Hello, Johnny.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to have you and I have so many things to ask you.
Bring it on.
So, yeah, Johnny, my first question is when you think about your childhood, what memories immediately come to mind? Because I'm trying to, understand how you were as a child.
Yeah, I remember I had a real temper. I definitely remember that. I would get really angry over things that probably didn't deserve that much anger. And
Mm,
I would get really stressed and anxious easily. And I think part of that was growing up in a home where I routinely was not safe. There was always a threat somewhere. So I think I was sort of stuck in fight or flight. And the
mm,
one thing that brought me peace no matter what I was going through was always music. So I knew that even though there were a million things that could stress me out and make me angry or afraid, there was always one thing that could bring me back down to earth, and that was playing guitar or listening to music.
So, what was your earliest experience of feeling different from other people?
I don't ever
Like
remember
growing up in a
feeling
home there was abuse, and
Yeah, I don't ever remember feeling similar to anybody. I remember there was one time where I went over to my friend's house. It was in middle school, and um, his dad was coming home from work, and he's like, "Oh, I can't wait for my dad to get home from work." And I was like, "What? You can be excited to have your parents come home?" And then both of my friends' parents sat at the dinner table with us and were joking around and talking and laughing. I was just like, his parents are so weird. And I remember thinking that his family was weird because it was so different from mine. And then as I
yes.
continued to hang out with more of my friends and their families, I was like, oh, maybe my family is the one that's different.
So how was, growing up in your house? There was this constant fear.
Yeah, I would say there was a lot of hiding. So I would hide in my room until my parents left, and then I would uh venture out from my room once I heard their cars pull away, and then if I heard their cars pulling in, then I would find a new hiding place. So it was that's why I love hanging out in my living room so much now, because I
Mm,
felt like for a long time I couldn't go into the living room for fear of being seen or being in harm's way. So now being in the living room is my favorite thing to do.
mm. Yeah, I understand that. So you've spoken openly about physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. What belief about yourself did those experiences plant in you that took the longest to unlearn?
Well, I think there's a few that come to mind. The first and probably the most pervasive is that I'm not safe. So there's some voice in
Mm.
the back of my head that's like, "Don't get too comfortable and don't relax and don't let your guard down because there's probably a threat lurking around the next corner." So that has been one that I've really tried to work on for most of my adult life is, like, being able to feel safe. And then another one that took me a long time, but actually less time than the safety one, was value and fault. So thinking like I was worthless or that I wouldn't amount to anything and that it was my fault that I was experiencing. Like basically I would think if I was a kid, well, if I was worth anything and if I was a good enough kid, I wouldn't be treated like this. So there was some part of me that always wanted to, like, if I could just get, instead of an A, if I could get an A plus, and instead of just winning the game, like if I played soccer and baseball and football when I was younger, and I'm like, well, if instead of winning the game, I could have won the season, or instead of winning the season, if I got the MVP, like I
Yes,
always
yes.
thought like if I could just perform a little bit better, then maybe the people around me would love me more and not treat me this way.
Mm. I'm wondering because first of all, I completely relate to the way you felt because I still now don't feel safe. I'm suffering from anxiety, and I never feel safe. I
Mm.
have that feeling always that I'm trying to control or predict what is going to happen. So, did you ever find yourself protecting the people that hurt you?
Oh, yeah. That is a really strange, I don't know if you've ever read Codependent No More?
No, no.
Oh, I strongly recommend it. It was not a fun book to read for me. Like, I wasn't like, "Woohoo!" in every chapter, but, it did teach me a lot about the dynamic that I had with people who abused me, and I did feel this sense of responsibility to the people who hurt me. Like, I would, in the same hour that I would be hurt by my father, I would rub his feet or clean his dishes or something like that. And it was this really weird dynamic where I think some part of me subconsciously must have been like, if I can just be good enough to this person, then maybe this will break this cycle of abuse. And
Yes,
I've even been in relationships like this where I was abused by a significant other, and I thought, well, if I could just be better to her, like, I must not be a very good boyfriend because I'm being treated this way, so if I could just be a better boyfriend, it all comes back to that performance thing. So strangely, even though I was being mistreated, I was actually treating her better and better and better. So it was this weird cycle where, like, the worse she treated me, the better I wanted to treat her, and I think that same dynamic existed with my parents when I was younger.
yes. Did you have anyone that could protect you?
That could protect me or did?
Yes, that could. Because
I think there were definitely people who could have protected me. I think there was a lot of, like, not knowing what to do. I think the people around me who could have done something were sort of like, "Well, we don't know how to react, or we don't know how to, like, how do you address this?" And I think a lot of people chose to not act at all. Like, when my friends found out, so Anna, in like 2020, I gave my first TED talk, and I had talked about like how I really struggled with suicidal ideation and self harm for a lot of my life.
mm,
And then I was so nervous for my friends to find out all of this stuff
yeah.
about me. And then I talked to them afterwards, and they're like, "Oh, we knew." And I was like, "What? The whole time you knew that I was struggling with that?" And they were like,
Oh,
"Yeah, it was obvious." And I said, "Well, why didn't anybody do anything? Like, nobody tried talking to me about it. No one asked, like, everyone just pretended to ignore it, and they were like, "We had no idea what to say, so we just didn't say anything. We had no idea what to do, so we didn't do anything." And I think a lot of that, I think that's really common in dynamics where there's abuse, because when someone gets big and angry, everyone else just kinda gets meek and
yes,
quiet, and they
yes.
just kinda wait for the storm to pass. And I'm not saying I was any better. When I was a kid, I did the
Mhm.
exact same thing. I just shrink up and wait
Oh,
for the storm to pass.
yeah. Because you were trying to protect yourself. Yeah. So tell me, Johnny, how much of the entity you built as a young man was actually a response to trauma?
there's an argument that a bunch of it, maybe even a majority of it, I don't think there's any clear way to delineate, you know, "Oh, this probably came from this." Like, I have
Mm,
theories, and one of my theories is, like, I would consider myself to be, um, anomalously accomplished for how old I am. Like, I've done an extraordinary amount of things and at a really high level that's not common for people my age. And I
mm.
think like, well, what would drive somebody to do that? Like, why would someone need to be excellent in all of these areas? And it probably is this like if you look at, I don't know, you look at, so Kanye West as an
Yes.
example. Everyone's like, "Whoa, he has mental health
Mhm.
problems." And I'm just like, yeah, probably anybody who is a platinum selling artist who also runs a record label, who also opens a clothing line, who also opens a school, who all like anyone who does a trillion things at an extremely high level, there must be, this is just my theory, I'm not a clinician,
Yeah,
but like
yes, of course.
normal people don't do that. Normal people can get a normal job and have a normal relationship and be perfectly satisfied and content.
Mhm.
But some, if you, I believe that if you dissect the brain of any high performer that's like, well, why are you doing it to that level? That's
Yes,
not
yes,
necessary. There must be
yes.
some part of them that's trying to earn respect or safety, even potentially from other people. But I think a lot of times they're trying to prove to themselves that they have value.
Exactly. Yes, yes. So what was the breaking point that finally made you seek help?
Um, I don't deserve credit for seeking help. I ran away from home when I was a teenager, and I had no idea where I was going, so I got lost immediately. This was before smartphones. I didn't have any
Mhm.
money because I was 16 years old. Um, and I didn't like print out MapQuest directions before I left. I had no idea where I was going anyway, so I was was gone for less than 24 hours. I had to ask for directions home because I was hungry and lost. And so I go home, and basically my mom is like, Either I can take you to the hospital or the police can take you. But either way, you know, we're gonna have to do
Yes.
something about your
Yes.
behavior." And so I didn't wake up one day and go, "You know what? Enough is enough. I'm gonna do something." Like I was so resistant when I started treatment. I was probably the hardest client some of my first clinicians ever met.
Tell me about that, 'cause I really wanna know how hard it was for you, um, to start getting treatment and being able to speak about everything you felt, because you were diagnosed with multiple
Mhm.
things, like, tell me about that.
I just didn't believe it, honestly. Like I was not educated about mental health at all. So I had, not
Mm,
only did I not know what I was going through, but I almost didn't want to know. Like imagine, like it's almost safer to not know you have bipolar disorder because then you can just be like, "Oh, the world is unfair and everything sucks." And then once there's shape to it, you're like, "Oh crap, now I have to do something about it." Like
mm,
it's sort of like if your car makes a noise and you're like, "Oh crap, I hope that's not expensive." And then what a lot of people do is they just keep driving and they're like, "Maybe the noise will go away and maybe
yes, yes,
I
yes,
don't want to find
exactly.
out if it's the alternator or whatever. Don't
Yeah,
even tell me." It's like ignorance is bliss. So I think when I was younger, I didn't believe, I not only did I not know about mental health, but I also didn't want to know. And then when I was formally diagnosed, I was like, what a bunch of crap. Like these people have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know me. They sit in a room with me for an hour and they think they know anything about my life, which by the way is how every teenager feels all the time. And
exactly.
finally, over the course of, I mean, months and months into treatment, I finally started participating. I was like, "Okay, I'll answer a question honestly instead of lying and pretending I'm fine." Or like,
Mm,
"Okay, maybe I'll read this article that she's telling me to read, or I'll rent this book from the library. I don't know if I'm going to read it, but I'll at least rent it. Like I was starting to loosen up. And then, much to my surprise, not shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, but treatment was helping. It was like
Mm,
therapy was working and medication was working. And it's like slowly, as I started to see those improvements, I started viewing the clinicians that were helping me not as my enemy, but maybe as people who were trying to help me, which they were the whole time. I just, when
yes,
I
yes.
started, I came in like, I can't stand being here and I can't stand you people. And slowly over time, I'd be like, wow, thank you for helping me. But it did take a long time.
And I forgot to ask you, Johnny, when did you start having those suicidal thoughts?
It was very young. I thought about suicide um all through middle school, high school, college, like all of that, and probably late elementary is when I first started, like, thinking about it, and then middle school was when I really actively, regularly was harming myself.
Mm, mm, yes. So when you were first given all those diagnoses, what scared you more, the symptoms or the labels?
Oh, the labels freaked me out because the symptoms I was familiar with. Like, I had
Mm,
had the symptoms forever, that didn't freak me out, that was just part of my everyday life. But the labels, I was so nervous, like, "I'll never get a job, I'll never have a girlfriend, like, no one's gonna wanna hang out with me," and by the way, those are, like, all the things that every teenager worries about, is like, "Can I
yes.
get a girlfriend? Can I get a job? Will I have friends?" Like, there were all of these sort of social implications, and I was like, nobody can find out that I'm dealing with this because I'm going to be socially ostracized.
And tell me, you were diagnosed with schizophrenia, right?
Hmm.
Bipolar. Tell me
Yep.
all the.
Yeah, it was a long list,
Oh,
and what's funny now is my current therapist is like, "Well, I don't really know if some of
mm,
these are
mm,
accurate. Maybe they were trauma responses, or
yes.
maybe some of them were like overlapping diagnoses." But I can tell you that schizophrenia, because I was hallucinating regularly, auditory and visual hallucinations. Bipolar for sure. That feels very accurate. I would be manic, like hyper productive, lots of
Hmm.
energy, very little sleep. I'd stay up all night writing a song or something, and I'd just be like, yeah, this is amazing. And then I'd go from that to like very long, like periods of weeks or months where I was very depressed and like couldn't I slept too much. So I would be sleeping 12 hours a day and I didn't want to even
Yes.
pick up my guitar. So lots of that very severe obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, and then, you could argue that maybe the OCD and anxiety had some overlap and the depression
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
bipolar had some overlap. Um, ADHD, like there's just a bunch of it was like such a cocktail where it's difficult
Yes.
to figure out which symptom is coming from what, but I do
And what
know
is
that
causing what, right?
yes, and my therapist was saying like, it's we'll never be able to know which symptoms you would be living with if you hadn't grown up in an abusive home. Like you can't, it's hard to figure out like which are maybe purely biological and which ones are more nurture. It's like that's the greatest debate in psychology. But I can tell you, I received a lot of diagnoses, and they were all scary to me.
Yeah. And how did your family react to that?
Well, there were varying degrees of belief. So
Oh,
for example, my dad didn't believe any of it. He was like, that's not real science. Like, what a bunch of crap. And that was kind of my attitude as well when I was diagnosed. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Like, I don't have
yes.
schizophrenia. And I would think like people with schizophrenia are crazy.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not crazy. Like, those people are crazy. Now that I'm an adult and I've thought a lot about this and I work in behavioral health, I realize that's what everybody does. Like, people go, I don't have an alcohol problem. My uncle has an alcohol
Hmm.
problem.
Hmm.
And then your uncle is like, I don't have one. My boss has one. Everyone's always pointing to somebody else.
Yes. 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 By the way, John, do you think there is still a stigma around mental health?
Definitely. Even like I love the fact that, like, Simone Biles can, like, do an interview about it, and everyone's like, "That's amazing," and then, like, Justin Bieber can tweet about it, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're our hero, Justin." Like,
Mhm.
I love that that exists, but I also
Yes.
think that that's one very small slice of the stigma pie, and I even think, like, here's my litmus test, like, is there stigma around mental health? Imagine if you found out that your significant other had schizophrenia.
Mhm, mhm.
Would that affect the way that you think about them or interact with them? 99% sure it would. And that, by the
Yes.
way, that's true even for me as someone
Mhm.
who lives with diagnoses and works full time in behavioral health. So I think while we've made an unbelievable amount of progress since I started working in this field, I also think that it's going to be a lifelong pursuit and it's going to take generations and generations to
Yes, yes.
undo the stigma that has existed for generations before we were even born.
Mm. Johnny, at your lowest point, what was the biggest misconception you had about yourself?
That I think, well, 2 come to mind. I'm sure there are more, but 2 come to mind right away. The first is that I am inconsequential. Like, it makes no difference if I'm alive or dead, if I'm here or not there. I
Mm.
just thought that, like, I didn't matter, and now I know that to be not true of anybody. Like, I can't think of a single person on the planet whose
Yes.
existence does not matter. I
Mm.
can't. What's funny? So recently I got into a car accident, and that's not funny. That's not the funny part. I got into a really serious car accident, and I was injured, and I was on bed rest for about a month, and I my car was totaled, and I just started driving again recently. I got a car
Mm.
and was able to, like, move around, and I, pull up to this stoplight where I always see this homeless person. I do not know her name, she does not know my name, but we talk every time I go to the stoplight, and she was like, "I've been looking for you.
Mm.
I didn't know where you were." And I was like, "I was looking for you. I came to this, like, I wasn't able to drive or walk for a month, and then I came to this intersection when I got a rental car when I could walk, and I didn't see you there, and I didn't know where you were." And she's like, "Yeah, I switched over to this corner because the shade's better." And then she's like, "I didn't see your car. I didn't know if you moved." And it's like, we do not know each other, Anna, but
Yeah.
like, we're relieved to see each other, and it's like, look at this, like, this is
Isn't
how
that
much we
beautiful?
matter to
Mm.
people we don't even know. We don't know each other's names. Like, just imagine how much you would matter to your dog or to your cousin or to your significant other. Like,
Yes.
we are all
Yes.
so
Yes.
interconnected. So that is one thing, was that the idea that I didn't matter, and the second was I was convinced that my life would never get better. I was convinced that it's either gonna be this bad or worse for the rest of my life, and
Yes.
that
Yes.
could not be further from the truth. I feel healthier in this moment today than I have ever felt in the history of my life, and that is not unique to today. I think 15 years ago, I was in abject misery, and today I feel healthier and well-adjusted than I ever thought I would.
No, I'm so happy for you, Johnny. I'm so happy for you. Um, but you studied psychology, right?
Yes.
In order to understand your own mind, I think you said.
Yeah, it
Were you
was not.
searching for answers?
Totally. I didn't. It's funny. When I was a teenager, I was like, I do not want to hear it from some stupid doctor. I'm going to learn it for myself. And it's like, wow,
Mm.
you think at 16 years old, you're going to outsmart someone with a PhD and the stuff that you're reading a level 1 textbook about. But I really had it in my head, like, I'm going to prove these people wrong. I'm going to learn what's actually true about me because I don't have schizophrenia. I don't have bipolar disorder. And I'm gonna prove it. And then unfortunately, well, fortunately, but unfortunately for me at the time, everything I read corroborated what these doctors had told me, and I was like, "Crap." But it was really interesting, so I kept reading.
Yeah. You've said, and I really love that you weren't seeking death, you were seeking relief,
Oh, yeah.
and I deeply understand that. But when did you realize that? Because I think I
Hmm.
wouldn't say everyone, but I believe most of the people that have suicidal thoughts, that's what they're seeking relief.
Yeah, I think so. For example, this might be a weird example, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, my current girlfriend was telling me about periods. I've
Hmm.
never had a period. So, like, there's a lot to learn. There's a big learning curve for guys when it
Yes,
comes to periods.
yes.
And so sometimes she would say, "Man, I just want red meat because I feel like just when I'm on my
Hmm.
period, I really want red meat. I just want like a big juicy burger." And then when we start talking more, she's like, "Oh, well, it's because I'm losing iron
Yes, yes.
when I'm on my period. So I really want iron." And it's like, "Oh, okay. So you could have broccoli, there's other sources of iron, and I think
Hmm.
when we experience suicidal ideation, we're like, "We want death." And it's like, "Oh, you want rest," and there's all sorts of ways to get rest. There's all sorts of ways to get distance from the pain that you're experiencing right now that are
Hmm.
not death. So it's kind of like imagine if my girlfriend was like, "No, I don't want iron. I want red meat." And it's like, "Okay, I
Yes.
understand that that's how it feels, but actually, we know that there's all these other sources of iron that could
Mm,
still satisfy that same need, potentially in a healthier way."
of course, of course. So, looking back now, what do you think the version of Johnny who wanted to die was really trying to escape pain, trauma?
It was for sure trying to escape pain, and honestly, I was exhausted. I if you Are you familiar with adrenal fatigue? Like,
Yes, of course. Yes.
I was in a dangerous environment almost all the time. Because think about it, either I would be hurt by the people around me in an abusive
Mm,
environment, or I would hurt myself because I was engaging in self-harm. So I was pretty much always in danger. And
I
by
know,
the
Johnny. I can relate totally
Yes,
because I've said that in another episode. I think I was born hand in hand with fear. I have
yes,
said that many times. That was my life and still is, but of
yeah,
course, not in the same degree. But
yeah.
yeah.
That goes back to the safety thing. Like, what I really wanted was for all of the chaos and torment and stress and fear and pain and everything, just I imagined death like an off switch. Like, I can
Mhm.
just hit that switch and it'll shut off all of these things. And
Yes.
I really, what I thought was that would be easier than trying to solve for each of these things. Like, I just wanna hit something and have it all be over, and I think that the sad part there is that I was so afraid and in such pain that I was willing to turn off all the good stuff too.
Mm,
I was willing to turn off being a person and my relationships with my friends and my
yes.
passion for music and like all of these my dog. I loved my dog so much. I was growing up. Her name is Casey. She's a
Mhm.
yellow lab. And I loved this dog so much, like more than anything. And I was like willing to throw away all of these things just to stop the pain. And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
at the time, I didn't know that there is a way to work through all of the things I wanted to turn off without having to throw away all the good stuff too.
Mm, mm. So let's talk about the plane. When you genuinely believed you were about to die, that's when I heard that about that experience. I mean, it must have been devastating, being there. Can you please describe those moments and what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, the short version, if anyone's listening and they wanna hear the whole story, I gave a TED Talk about it, that you can
Yes.
find on YouTube. If you just search my name and TED Talk, it's the one where I'm wearing a red shirt and, because I have a couple on there. And, basically the short version of the talk is I was on a plane that, was gonna crash, and it was really scary, but it was also, like, strangely peaceful, but also, like, confusing because you'd think that if someone wanted to die and was actively suicidal, then dying on a plane is kinda best case scenario, because
Hmm.
then you didn't even have to kill yourself, you just died through something else, and, instead of feeling like, "Yay," I was like, "Dang." Like, this is not, I guess I didn't wanna die right now, and that is
Mm,
actually really common, by the way. I have, a friend, Kevin Hines, who's an extraordinary public speaker, and he talks a lot about his experience with suicidal ideation. And he has said many times that it's not uncommon, and I believe this was his experience as well, for people to take that leap, like to either like to take that step towards ending their own life, and then immediately be like, "Oh no."
mhm, mhm.
Like, I might have thought I wanted this, but
Yes.
now that it's getting this real, and by the way, it's very common for people to, take a bunch of pills to end their own life and then call 911 immediately
Yes, of
and go like,
course, of
"No,
course.
crap, never
Yes,
mind, I don't
yes.
wanna do this." So,
Mm,
I felt that way on the plane where I was like, "Oh, yeah, death sounded great forever," and then when confronted with it, I was like,
mm,
"No, this must not have been what I wanted, because here I should be jumping up and down and clapping on this plane." And instead, I am somber, and I feel like there are parts of life that I do like and do care about, and it was so, it it taught me that death wasn't the solution that I thought it would be.
mm. Yes. And what mattered more than you ever expected? I mean, thinking what you're about to lose, because when you want to end your life, right? You're sick of everything. You just want relief. But at that point, when you are about to die, do you really think of what really matters in life? What's more important to you? Something that you weren't aware before that was important to you.
Yeah, I think so. I'm very career driven. So, I I just like building stuff and accomplishing stuff, and I have big dreams, and so there were things that I thought would really matter to me. Um, like, I thought that I would be heartbroken that I never got to tour Europe or something. Like, that's always been on my like bucket list. Oh, I really want to, or I really wanna, tour with this certain band, like, stuff like that, and then in this moment, I was
Hmm.
like, I just thought more about who I was internally and not external things that I had wanted to accomplish. So, I just
Yes.
thought critically about, like, well, if I only got to be alive for 30 years, who was I? Like,
Mm,
am I pretty happy with the dude that I got to be for those 30 years? And it was so weird too, because, like, for people who are listening who have, for example, like financial goals, like there was one moment where I'm like, wow, all the people in first class are gonna die too. Like they
yes.
they probably have 100 times as much money as I do in their bank account. It's like we're all on the same plane that's going down.
Mm,
So like really all of those circumstantial things, like they mattered a lot less in that moment. And all that really matters, like, well, who did I get to be while I was alive? And it was what really surprised me was I hadn't spent a lot of time getting to know myself before that. I'd spent a lot of time doing stuff, like building stuff and accomplishing
mhm,
things,
mhm,
like external things, but I hadn't spent a lot of time getting to know, like, well, who the heck am I, and what matters to me, and like, I'd done a lot of work in therapy to get at least less angry, but I think the next step after, the plane emergency landed and we survived, and by the way, for a few days after that, I thought I had died in the plane crash. It was so weird. It was, like,
yes. Yes.
trippy to be
Mhm.
like, "Is this a dream, or, like, what happened?" But then when I got home, I was like, "Well, crap, I really wanna get to know myself." And I think I had put a lot of my attention towards doing things and building things, and then I wanted to turn my attention after that towards, like, who I wanna be instead of what I wanna do.
Mm. Tell me about Coke Notes.
Well, it is my baby. I have spent, um, 9 years of my life building, um, resource that sends messages to people every day on their phone that, trains their brain to combat stress, anxiety, and depression.
How did
So,
you come up with that idea, Johnny?
well, in school, I was learning about, So I'm a peer support specialist. I love peer support. It's just basically getting talking to someone who understands what you're going through. That's all that
Mhm,
is. And I'm a huge proponent of peer support and health education. So I went to school for psychology, and the more I learned about my brain, the better able I was to take care of it. So I love peer support and I love health education. And I was learning about um, neuroscience, like how and why the brain changes. And I
mhm,
was like, man, I wonder if there's a way to like basically interrupt automatic negative thought with health education content. And then over time, if that could train your brain to form new neural pathways. So
mhm.
I did like a bunch of research into that. That's actually what my first TED talk is about, if anyone is curious about neuroscience. Um, and that rabbit hole was really inspiring for me because it made me think like, oh, my brain can change over time. And it is just gonna take consistency, and I wanted to build something that could be that consistency for other people.
Mm. I think one of the hardest things to do is break old patterns and beliefs because they're so rooted in us and they just come up every time. Sometimes I want to change, my behavior towards something, the way that I react to something. But, you know, that old habits, that old patterns just keep being there.
But it's so cool to know that, like, the brain can change and does change. Like, the brain is changing all the time, whether we want it to or not. Like, everything that we experience is influencing our brain. And look no further than, like, the person who, moves to Europe and then can drive a car on the other side of the road.
Hmm,
Like,
hmm.
people do this, and to me,
Yes,
it's
yes.
unfathomable. Like, if I in my head, if I moved from America to London, and I had to drive on the other side of the road and sit on the other side of the car, I think I'd get in an accident within a day of
Me
having my
too.
driver's license over there,
Me
but
too.
the fact is people do it all the time. How? Consistency. Over time, that becomes their new
Yeah, but
normal.
for some people, it's easier, and for others, it's not.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
working to increase your neuroplasticity is, like, paramount. Like, just making sure that you are learning new things and establishing new normals on a regular basis really helps your brain stay sharp. There's all sorts of, like, tips and tricks and stuff I'm sure you could find online,
mhm,
but just the idea that our brains can change is such a relief to me.
yeah, yeah, it is to everyone. So, tell me about Cope Notes and what exactly you do.
Yes, we send one text per day at a random time that contains health education content. So today you could get a psychology fact. I might get a journaling prompt. My mom gets an exercise. And over time, these little 10-second interruptions literally train the brain to form new neural pathways associated with coping skills and resilience and positive thoughts. So really, we tell people we're in the business of, like, thought pattern and behavior change. Like, we want your new normal to be healthier than it was before you started working with us.
So, another question that I wanted to ask you is, you know, can achievement, because you are an overachiever in a way, but can achievement sometimes become an attempt, to earn self worth we don't already feel?
Yeah, I was talking to my girlfriend about that last night. Since the car accident, I have not, like, gone on a run or ridden my bike or played pickleball. Like, there's lots of physical activity that I cannot do
Mm.
for a while. And um at first it felt torturous. It was like, whoa, if I can't do all those things, I couldn't even go to a sauna. It was like I just felt trapped. I couldn't go lift weights, and I
Mm.
just felt like just a blob. And then after a while I was like, no, it's okay to not work out every day. It's okay to not work every day. It's okay to not be hyper
Yes.
productive in every little
Mm.
corner of your life. Like, I'm the type of person where, like, if I'm folding laundry, for example, I'm also listening to a health education podcast or
Oh,
something. It's like, dude, can you just maybe only do one productive thing at a time? Like, is
yes,
it
yes, yes.
possible for you to just relax and enjoy a little bit without being productive? And I think strangely, the accident has like made me come face to face with like, yes, sometimes you literally can't get out of bed. You are not
No,
allowed to.
no.
You are on bed rest. That means you don't leave your bed. And I would still check this out, Anna. The day after the accident, I did press, like traditional media for Cope Notes.
Wow.
And it was like, Johnny, this is the type of thing that you reschedule if you get into a serious accident and you are injured. And some part of me was like, I can't reschedule because, like, who knows when they could get me in again. And now I'm just like, dude, you have to get to a point where you can allow yourself to rest when you need it and also even when you don't. Like I think strangely
Mm,
I'm starting to go easier on myself and it's because I went through something hard. So now I don't wanna be hard on myself. Life was already hard on me. I wanna be easy on
yes,
myself.
yes, yes, exactly, exactly. So through your music, speaking, and mental health work, I'm sure you've heard countless stories of struggle and resilience. What have those stories taught you about people?
Yeah, I hear them. I'm spoiled because I hear them all the time. Every single literally yesterday, I spoke in Orlando.
Mhm,
Last week, I spoke in Bardstown, Kentucky. Next week, I'm speaking in Chicago, Duluth, Minnesota, um, one other city that I can't even French Lick, Indiana. Like, I'm literally in different cities every week speaking at conferences, and after I get off stage, there's a big line of people that
mm,
tell me all of these stories from their life afterwards, and every single day, I hear crazy stories of people overcoming, like, I think, like, "Oh, I've been through so much." Then I got off stage and these people, I'm talking they got their leg amputated. These
mm,
people had a traumatic brain injury from like a helicopter crash. These people
yes,
like you would not even believe the level of resilience. And I
mm,
mean, Anna, you cannot tell. These people who walk up to me, you can't tell. You can't
yes, I'm
tell by
sure, I'm
looking at them.
sure.
You have no clue. And it one lady is going to be 75 years old and go like, I was homeless for 4 years and almost starved to death in the winter in Chicago. And it's like, holy crap, look at you. And then the
Yes,
very next person in
yes,
line is like a parent and they're like, my daughter is 7 and she has leukemia. And it's just like, whoa. And you hear story after story of people, every race,
mm,
every faith and religion, every age, like you wouldn't what it shows me is like human beings are tough as nails.
mm,
It's not just certain people who are singled out by a cruel world. No, life can be cruel, period. There are things
yes,
that happen in our lives that
yes,
are extraordinarily difficult, and there is very little, at least from the outside, there's very little rhyme or reason as to who experiences extremely difficult things. From what I can tell, it looks like it's just about everybody.
mm.
The real qualifier is who talks about it.
Exactly,
Because for
yes,
every one
yes,
person who has a leg amputated and will tell me there's 75 people who always wear long pants and would never even dream
mm,
of letting somebody see their prosthetic leg. And, like,
yes,
those people who are willing to actually talk about it, those are the ones that fire me up because they remind me how many people out there are going through difficult things and surviving them.
exactly, exactly. Johnny, you often also talk about, becoming a friend to yourself. How can someone achieve that? What
You
are the baby steps that someone can take?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in getting to know yourself, and one of my favorite ways to do this is gonna sound so basic, but trying stuff.
Trying different
You
stuff. Yeah.
you learn a lot about yourself, like, dude, if you've never tried Taiwanese food, go try it. If
Mm.
you've never tried ice skating, go try it. If you've never tried going to a reggae concert, go try it. Like, just try stuff, and I feel that you learn a lot about yourself, especially, this may be an unpopular opinion, but especially doing it alone. Because if I,
Oh,
for
yeah.
example, if I went to a reggae concert with my mom, part of me would be thinking about her. Like, what's going
Yeah.
on? Is she happy? Is she comfortable? Did that guy bump into her? Like, is she thirsty? It's like part of
Yes.
your brain is not being
Yes,
fully
yes,
present.
yes, you're right.
But if you can go somewhere on your own where your only responsibility is to just experience that thing, you learn a lot about yourself. You're like, wow, I think that waitress is really pretty. And I didn't even know I liked redheads. That's kinda cool, and then they're, like, playing some music, and you're like, "Oh, this is, like, R&B." Like, I don't really listen to R&B, but, this song is kinda cool. I wonder, I'm gonna use Shazam and see what song this is. Then you're reading
Mhm.
a menu, and you're like, "I don't even know what coriander is. I'm gonna Google it. What's coriander?" And you, like, are out, this is all one experience, and you go out into the world and try something new, and you just discover a lot about yourself. "Oh, I learned that
Mm.
I like this, and that this is interesting to me, and that this is too spicy for me," or whatever. Like, those experiences slowly, if you do it one time, maybe you're like, "Well, that was a waste of time." But if you do it 20 times across 20 different things, you
Yeah.
wind up really building a rapport with yourself.
Mm. Yeah. And Johnny, my last question is, what's something you know now that you wish, every person who is struggling could know about themselves?
I would say the two things that we mentioned earlier, I would say you matter, which is, I have a tattoo on the back of my neck that says you matter. So, like, you matter.
Mm.
Whether, I don't even care if you think you're inconsequential. You're wrong. Respectfully, you're wrong. It does matter whether you live or die. And the second thing is, if you are convinced that life will not get better, respectfully, you don't know that. There is no way for you to be certain that the rest of your life is going to be worse than it is right now. You
Mm.
don't know that. You don't even know. You don't know. Do you think that if you interviewed everybody who won the lottery the day before they won the lottery, did you think you're going to win the lottery? No.
No.
The day before I
No.
met my, let's see, the day before I met my guitarist of my first band, did I think I was ever gonna be in a band? No, I couldn't meet anybody to make a band with. Like,
Mm.
our lives change every day.
Yes.
Things,
Yes.
every day people fall in love and win the lottery, and you know what I thought that helped keep me alive? I thought, "I've probably never heard the funniest joke I'll ever hear. I've probably never heard my favorite song I'll ever hear.
Yes.
I've probably never eaten the best meal I'll ever eat." Like, there's so much more, and that could be next Thursday. Could
Mm.
be the best meal I've ever eaten in my entire life. Or, like, a year from now, my favorite movie of all time could come out, and I don't even know that it's gonna happen, and I wanna
Yeah.
stick around to see what's gonna happen.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So, Johnny, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Of course.
And again, thank you for inspiring and motivating everyone through everything you do.
You bet. You too. I appreciate you using your platform this way. This is if everyone who had a microphone used it the way you use it, the world would look a lot different.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As I said again, I'm trying to find myself, through
Yeah.
other people's journeys, because every story matters. You
Amen.
know, yeah. And to all of you, as we always say, ego is here. You are here, and that's enough.